You are listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Archaeotech Podcast, episode 37. I'm your host, Chris Webster, with my co-host, Chris Sims. On today's show, we welcome Michael Ashley of Codify, and we get into the heart of the Apple Keynote that took place this morning as of the time of recording. Let's get to it. Welcome to the show, everyone. Joining us today, we have a special guest, Mr. Michael Ashley of Codify, who is practically a permanent guest co-host at this point on the Archaeotech Podcast, and he's going to help us talk about the Apple Keynote today. Welcome, Michael.
Hey, glad to be here.
All right, so we've got a lot to cover today. We may or may not get to an App of the Day segment, but the Apple Keynote was 2 hours long, actually an hour and probably 30 minutes long, because if you take out all of the We Love Ourselves stuff from Apple and then the live music at the end by somebody I'd never personally heard of, but I'm not probably connected with all that, then yeah, it was about an hour and 30 minutes worth of content. But they actually packed in quite a bit of content into that, so... real quick, if you aren't aware of what the hell we're talking about, go check out the show notes. Click on my blog post. It's blog post number 277 on my blog, and there's a link in the show notes. And it's got all the stuff listed out that we're going to talk about today, and even some stuff that we didn't talk about today. So, all right. So, Chris and Michael. First off, I watched the whole keynote. Michael watched most of the keynote. And Chris is watching all the responses to the keynote. He's got some friends that are really into this and that. So, Chris, as somebody who didn't watch the keynote, let's start with you. What are your first? I mean, you're an Apple fanboy. You might not want to admit it, but you're an Apple fanboy. You've got all the gadgets. You just bought a brand new MacBook Pro, although I would have advised you to wait because there's likely going to be a refresh in a couple months, but I didn't want to tell you that. So anyway, you just bought a new MacBook Pro. You've got an iPhone. You've got an iPad. What are your first impressions on just the information you heard from the announcement?
Well, the information I've heard and the feedback I've received from a couple of friends who are professionals in like the technology and app development fields is it seems like the iPhone 7 is approaching a professional tool. It might not be the one-stop shop for professionals on the go, but the thing I'm most excited about is the ability to shoot in RAW, and we can cover that later on. But the camera itself is the death of point-and-shoot cameras. I think we've been approaching that through smartphone technology as a whole, but I think now finally we have a tool that has killed the point-and-shoot camera.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you might be right. Apple was saying... of course, just those things, because everything they do, they say is gorgeous and revolutionary. So, but I think they might be onto something with this, and you're totally right. So we're going to cover the iPhone 7 a little later in our segment, so we'll get to the cameras. I want to talk about some of the other stuff that our listeners may not be as up on. So one of the first things, however, is the first thing that's in my blog post, and if I scroll back over to that real quick. I minimized my browser. Anyway, the biggest announcement I thought was the inventor of Mario Brothers came onto the screen. I can't remember what his name is, some Japanese guy, and told us all about the first actual Nintendo sanctioned Mario Brothers game coming to the iPhone by Christmas, called Super Mario Run. So that, I think, was the real game changer, because he said it's a great time waster, it's the first one you can play with one hand, so you can do other stuff like hold a rail on a subway. And I was thinking, or hold a trowel. I was thinking, hold a trowel and keep digging while you're saving the princess.
Walk through the desert.
Yeah. So anyway, that's obviously not the biggest announcement, but it's pretty exciting for anybody over the age of 30, probably. So anyway, before we get into hardware too, there's one other software piece I want to mention also before we talk about Sierra at the end. But the iWork collection of apps, and quite frankly, I didn't know they were still calling them the iWork suite of apps. I thought they'd kind of dropped that, but they haven't. They mentioned it just then. And iWork just really refers to Pages, Numbers, and Keynote. And for those of you that don't know, Pages is the word processing program. Numbers is a spreadsheet program like Excel. And then Keynote is their presentation software, similar to, except way superior to, PowerPoint. And the biggest news there was real-time collaboration. They had you never can tell how genuine this stuff is on stage, but because it's all staged, so to speak. But they took the keynote that they were using and added another slide, and they had the person on stage and then two other people actually adding elements simultaneously. You could see them coming in. Whether or not that was actually real and not just video, I couldn't tell you. But it was all coming in, and even if it works as half as snappy as that, I think the people that are all on the Google space because of real-time collaboration, could probably be actually switching to some of the Apple apps. I don't know, Michael, you're a pretty big Google guy as far as Google Docs and Google Sheets and all that stuff goes. Is it because of the real-time collaboration, or just because, you hate Apple's platforms for that stuff? I mean, we all hate Microsoft, so it's not even part of the conversation. But what do you think about the real-time collaboration on those apps?
Well, I mean, actually, I don't hate it at all. I mean, I just say, like, here we are in our show notes today are in a Google Doc because it's ubiquitous and it is in real time, and this has kind of been Google's wheelhouse. Mm-hmm. But what I've been waiting for this to happen for so long, because to me it means we can have, I mean, on your mobile device in the field, mm-hmm. Basically every paperless app I've seen that people have developed, or workflow that they've developed, ultimately, actually, if it's using iPads or iPhones, winds up using Pages to build out the reports, mm-hmm. and other apps like Graphic or whatever else to do things like location maps and drawing and all that, which is great, and it actually works really well because it's designed for the hardware, right? Mm-hmm. Here we now have a situation where we could actually have a very secure system and still have real-time collaboration on notes, on interpretation, on graphics, on all sorts. I mean, the mind literally boggles to me on what would be possible. Right. I mean, I think this is probably certainly in my brain, like in the top 3 things that were mentioned today for archaeology and the way that we work in the mm-hmm. field. So I'm beyond psyched by this.
Yeah, anything that gives us real-time collaboration so we can work simultaneously on documents, I think is obviously a step in the right direction. Because, I mean, right now, my workflow in the field has been such that if I had a larger company, and I was one of those companies that had an army of people in the office, as it was, I had an army of one in the office usually, and it was either me or my colleague Deanna. So it was either one of us in the office. It wasn't exactly an army, but we could, if we'd had better connectivity at China Lake when we were working there last year, we could have, and this is incredibly possible, taken all of our data on an hour-by-hour basis and transmitted it to to like Dropbox or something, and then had somebody working on that stuff. Well, this is, you start talking about real-time collaboration. That's forced collaboration. We had to actually actively upload that stuff, and then somebody had to access it or download it on the other side and then work with it, which seems so archaic now to talk about it, but it's only been a few years that we've been able to do that. And now, with more and more things going to this real-time collaboration, because connectivity is getting more ubiquitous, it seems like you're right, Michael. It's a potential game changer, or at least a step in the game-changing direction for the stuff that we can do. I mean, I'm imagining a future where, we'll be... You can actually be producing data in an application that's connected, and there's no reason somebody can't actually be watching that happen in real time on the other side, somewhere in an office, somewhere, anywhere that's connected to the internet. Why not? It's not exactly possible right now, that level of collaboration, but I think that's where we're headed. So, a little bit of a Big Brother thing, some people will probably think, but you can think of it that way, or you can think of it as, hey, we're doing error correction and resource checking and checking references on things as you're working on the site. You're getting information from the office related to the artifacts and features that you're recording. I think that'd be incredibly powerful. I don't know.
Well, I mean, yeah. I'll just throw this in here real quick to say, I mean, just a summer on like 7 different projects we were working on, all of us, in fact. The things that take the most time, like working through, as you just mentioned, say GPS correction of data. Someone has to do that work, right? and or having a series of images and having them be processed for a photogrammetry sequence, or having a specialist who's you find you're working on a shell mount, and you want to send some sample data to your shell specialist or whatever, or your follow specialist. I mean, that's totally doable now.
Yeah.
It's just that we don't think like that because we're used to doing things in kind of this during field, and then we process our stuff, and then we send it to the back office, and then we do post-X, and then we spend months and months and months kind of redoing everyone's work.
Yeah.
So this to me is a real shot across our heads to really think through some other ways that we could be doing this stuff, and I just think it's great.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up. I want to bring this up real fast because this isn't the podcast for it. But we're going to have a Codify podcast that is going to start coming out probably in October, and that's the kind of stuff we're going to be talking about for just archaeological site recording, or not just archaeological site recording, but everything, which is not. Let's not just think about using these new tools or even old tools in some cases to just record archaeological sites in the way that we're used to, but let's think completely outside the box. Let's think completely off the rails and say, well, how can we just change everything about how we do this and reduce all of the clutter down to just pure science and efficiency? How can we do that? And all of these tools that Apple announced today are steps in that direction. So, okay, let's move on. I want to talk about Watch OS 3. Yes, they're on the third version of that software already, 14 months after or I guess 16 months after the Apple Watch came out. And Watch Series 2. So first off, I've got these backwards on my blog post, but I want to talk about the watch first because I think a number of the Watch OS 3 new things that it can do are probably only going to be available on the Watch Series 2. I'm not sure about that because I didn't really get into that, but that's just the way things go. You need the faster processor and graphics to be able to run some of the stuff from the new operating system, usually. So, however, so let's talk about the watch first. Let me get some of the attributes out of the way. First off, again, they're calling it Series 2, and they changed the name of the first one to Series 1, which they're still going to offer. They just reduced the price on it, which we'll also get into. But anyway, so Series 2 is completely waterproof. Series 1, the one I've got on my arm right now, is water resistant. Well, they call it splash proof. So you can get it in the rain. You can actually run it underwater in a faucet to, if you get like sunscreen and stuff in your little rotating bezel, the crown they call it, you can wash that out like that, or lotion and stuff. It kind of sticks it up. But you can wash that stuff out in the sink. You can shower with it, actually. They kind of tell you not to, but Tim Cook does every day, famously, from what I hear. And I've showered in mine a few times, mostly accidentally because I like to clean that part of my arm. But anyway, but the new one is waterproof, absolutely used for swimming. They built this rig that they showed in the keynote that simulated thousands and thousands of laps of swim time. And it's water resistant to 50 meters, which is the industry standard for swimming capable watches. So let's move on a little bit. Some of the other stuff, some of the more geeky stuff. It's got a dual core processor now, which is 50% faster than the old one. 2 times the graphics on the new graphics processing unit, or GPU. Something relevant to archaeology, which I definitely experienced. It's got the brightest display ever. Great for bright sunlight, like when you're surveying. I did notice a few times that the watch was slightly difficult to see, although I thought the display was pretty bright already, depending on the display you have selected. I had really no trouble seeing it in bright sunlight, but now it's even brighter, so that's all good. They've got a new case, the ceramic version. I just saw before we started the show that it's like $1,250, which sounds like a lot of money, but then again, they apparently quietly got rid of the gold case today, the solid gold one that ran for $10,000 to $15,000 or $10,000 to $17,000, depending on the version you got, the band you got with it. So that's gone. They took it off the store today, and they added the ceramic one, which is a little weird. And real quick, the Series 2 is available starting at $369, pre-order on the 9th, which is Friday, or midnight on Thursday, and available next week. So you could have this thing on your wrist by the end of next week. And one of the other, Michael's mentioning in the background here, it's on my list, and I forgot to mention one of the biggest things. This thing has a built-in GPS. So right now, you can put music and stuff on your watch. I think mine is a 6 gigabyte. I think that's standard. and you can put music on there, connect Bluetooth headphones to it. But if you went for a workout, you can't really do anything except track calories and steps, okay? There's no GPS, so you can't map anything. And with the mapping, you get speed, you get all these other side attributes with a built-in GPS. But I can't do that with mine. I have to have my phone with me and the watch tied to the phone to get that information. Well, the new one has a built-in GPS, so you can do all that stuff right on the watch. And because it's using everything more efficiently, you can load up different things on there for use outside of cell range or outside of your phone range, or just leave your phone at home and do everything right on the watch. Now, you still can't make a cell call, which is about the only thing they didn't put in there. And Apple said that's because the cellular chip technology just isn't up to snuff as far as battery life and size goes. So they're working on that, I'm sure. But okay, so that's the new watch features. I'll stop right there for a second. Guys, what do you think? I know, Michael, you're talking about getting an Apple Watch here soon. Is this the thing that's going to change your mind and help you get one?
Yes.
All right.
It's like, okay, when the iPad came out, and again, I like Apple stuff. I won't lie, but if there was another device out there, I would use it. I haven't worn a watch haven't worn a watch since Swatch watches were cool.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm not really a watch person either.
But the idea of having, but I love working out, and I love writing, and I love tracking all my stuff and all that goodness. And so to me, the idea of having something that's going to just motivate the crap out of me to do that, and that's in my face, is really cool. I was excited about the watch initially, but I wasn't excited enough to drop $400 on it. But GPS changes the game for me, because, and Chris, I'll be excited to hear you talk a bit more about the things I missed in the keynote around some of the other ways that GPS can be enabled. But I know later we're going to talk about the developer side.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is we have a haptic device on our wrist and the other thing that Apple is doing that's amazing is their focus on health.
Yeah.
And so I'm just going to have us live in the future for a little bit here, because it should be our present. I want us to imagine, future archaeologists or surveyors out in the field with a device that's helping them keep on track, helping them consider, their own personal health, while they're also staying on their transect and getting, all the data that they need about the environment that they're looking at, and all that's happening to them in real time without them having to pull out, an iPad or paper or any other form of medium to get their job done. I think that this is a huge leap forward, and the fact that it is 2 times brighter than the previous watch, that it's really geared towards outdoor activities, and that it's fully waterproof.
Yeah.
This is huge, and it's it's $400, so it's not like it's $1 million. I mean, one of the things we're all considering is how to make the GPS sub-meter or even more accurate as needed, and that's a future podcast. But this is I think a pretty huge mental leap for the way that we think about how we are working with technology. So yeah, to say the least, I'm pretty excited.
Nice. Well, we're going to take a break here shortly, but I will say one thing just to leave us with this thought before we go to break. If this thing has a built-in GPS chip, and it does, and it also has Bluetooth, and it does, if there's no restrictions on the Bluetooth, well, then there should be no reason you can't connect the Trimble R1, a Bluetooth sub-meter device, to your watch. Now, the R1's location will be the sub-meter location, so if it's in your backpack, that's where you're getting that. And I doubt you're going to strap it to your wrist, but it's still interesting to think about. It's interesting to think about the fact that you could have sub-meter on your wrist by the end of next week, which is actually a real thing. So let's go to break, and then we'll talk about a little more about the hardware, and then we'll get into watchOS 3. The Archaeology Podcast Network's conference channel is a collection of interviews from conferences around the world. Interviews are usually posted during the conference with minimal editing, so you, the listener, can be there virtually. Check out the conference feed at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/conferences. Now let's get back to the show. Okay, we're back, and I left you with some pretty earth-shattering information, at least earth-shattering to me. I don't know. It sounds pretty cool. So let's talk about Watch OS 3 real quick. And like I said, I don't know if you currently have a Watch Series 1. I don't know how many of these features will actually work on your device because, again, some of them are likely hardware dependent. But we'll know on September 13th because that's when you can download it for your watch if you do have one. First off, apps launch instantly, which is kind of amazing. They're using, which I honestly don't think that's going to work very well on the Series 1 because part of that is the new processor. And right now, when I hit to tap on an app on my watch, if I wasn't already running it in the background for some reason, like just a minute ago, it does take, it can take up to 10, 20, 30 seconds for that watch app to come up, which is ridiculous because I could have got my phone out by then. So that'll be a big game changer. New dock for apps, which means similar to everything. You double tap the home button on your iPhone, or you do Apple Tab on your computer, and you've got apps that are currently running that are just easily accessible right there. So that'll be pretty nice. New watch faces, which, that's cool. Writing on the screen for notes. Now, that's an interesting thing. When you watch the Apple, like from WWDC back in June, they demoed this, and they demoed it again here, but a little less extensively. It seems like it's a pretty good algorithm and an application for you just simply writing text. It can even do like Chinese characters, which is crazy. But you're just writing text on your face, and it's interpreting that as letters and numbers and spaces and things, and you can actually tap out a pretty good message just by actually writing on the face of your watch one letter at a time. I don't know how efficient that's going to be. We'll have to see and play with it, but anyway, activity sharing, which I think was one of the big things missing from the Apple Activity series. It's one of the reasons I like using Runkeeper and stuff like that, is I can save my stuff to Facebook and Twitter, and people can comment, and we can share and compare notes and do different things. Well, Apple has a great activity fitness thing going on with their rings and their progress and all that stuff, but it's just buried in your device and you can't share it out to anywhere. But now it looks like you'll actually be able to do that and then compete with your friends and do different things, which is one of the reasons I really liked the Fitbit app. It was very, there was a lot of competition with it, and I really liked that. So, and also my Fitness Pal, you can have friends and you can track each other and things like that, and that's pretty cool. One thing that also will be good for archaeologists, I think, is they've got this new, as Michael was saying, an emphasis on fitness, but one of those things is deep breathing exercises every day. It'll prompt you to just stop, take a minute, take a deep breath, and it'll show you as a graphic on the screen on how to breathe that, and it's probably actually tracking how well you're doing that by accurately measuring your heart rate, which is pretty cool. Another thing that's good for archaeologists, and it's the final thing I'll mention on the software, is the ability to contact emergency services within seconds. So you hold down one of the buttons and it instantly calls 911. Hopefully it gives you a little prompt first. I don't know, because that'll be probably easy to push. But it instantly calls 911 or whatever emergency services are in the country you happen to be in. And it'll do that and then send a text message to whoever you have listed as your emergency contact within your iPhone contacts, and tell them that you just called 911 and give them your GPS location based on your watch. So that's a pretty sweet little deal, especially for people surveying where they have connectivity. I know if you're out there and you happen to be by yourself, you got bit by a snake, hit it and you're done.
Yeah. I mean, that's huge for us as archaeologists, but I'm looking at it as like huge for a public safety and like public health capacity. I mean, we're looking at like an alarming number of rapes and stuff throughout the world.
Oh, yeah.
And this is the kind of thing that can, hopefully help put an end to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you should be able to hit it pretty simply, and it just calls. Like I said, it'll probably prompt you or something, but in just a couple seconds, rather than pulling your phone out and being super obvious about it, which might get you in the instance of crime, might get somebody to go into a rage on you, like, what the hell are you doing? Put your phone away. But you can just almost discreetly push your watch.
Yeah, you really make yourself a vulnerable target when you stop. You're like, oh wait, hold on, don't attack me. I need to pull out my phone, unlock it, enter the password, and dial 911.
Right. Yeah.
No, I think you guys are. I think you guys are right. I mean, as someone who has been, has taught self-defense and has dealt with lots of really scary things,
Mm-hmm.
feel like this is, this is really, Apple has made a stand towards health, and they're addressing. I mean, one thing we can talk about later when we talk about the actual development side of this is where your data is being stored and how the actual security chain and privacy works, because it's important to understand that they are definitely leading the charge in the world on this. But back to the field, can you just imagine, like, you have, Chris was describing in the podcast, okay, so I go this way, I got ordnance, I got this way, I have snakes, right? And you have the ability right on your phone to call emergency services, and similarly, as an organization or a company, we would have the ability to motivate you to think about, like, all right, hey, it is time to stand. It is time to get off your butt if you're in the office, because it's not just the guys in the field, but it's also the folks back in the office who are sitting there, probably sitting there, um, not getting their 10,000 steps. I've been trying to get my 10,000 steps in the last couple of weeks. It's not easy. 10,000 is a big number. So
It's a lot.
it is a lot, and hydration and all that stuff. These are all things that having this little device on your wrist could really help with. I think it's great. It's awesome.
Yeah, and one of the things to bring all these features together, one of the apps that was demoed on screen, and I didn't write this down. I don't remember what it was. It was like View Ranger or something like that. It was called. Anyway, it was they were calling it the world's first hiking application built specifically for the Apple Watch. And it looked like you could run this thing entirely on the watch, but my guess is with integration with the iPhone, they use the example of Yosemite National Park. If anybody's ever been to Yosemite, you know that you quickly lose cell service the minute you get out of the valley. If you have it in lots of the parts of the valley anyway, the valley where all the big waterfalls and, El Capitan and all that is, the minute you leave that area, you've got no cell service. You can forget about it. So, or at least it's not very good. So one of the things they showed, and think about this in terms of survey, which is what I was doing, but one of the things they showed was okay, I'm going to save these particular hikes, and then I'm going to flow through them on my Apple Watch and say, okay, I want to do that one. Then it gives you turn by turn instructions. You can see an overall map of where you've been, because all this is on your watch and you don't even need your phone. So it does all these things. It'll let you know you're off your route, and I don't know what the sensitivity is on that is, but it was like, it sent a push notification that says, hey, you're going off the marked trail or something like that. If you want to get back on, hit this button, and it'll give you arrows on how to get back onto your track. Now, my thinking is, let's upload your shovel test for the day. Let's upload your shovel testing grid and say, you've got to do these shovel tests. You can see them all on a map, and you can see them change colors as you finish them, because you can just track that right on your watch, or it can link to your iPhone or something like that, and where you're actually recording your data, and then you can just look at your watch. It can say, bam, let's go in this direction, and oh shit, I'm crossing somebody else's transect. Then it like does that virtual haptic slap on your face, and lets you know you're crossing somebody's transect. So I think 30 meters is a pretty good distance for that thing to be able to track. So if you can create an application that will bring that tolerance down a little farther to like 10 meters, that would be fantastic. So what do you guys think about that? Chris, you've done a lot of shovel testing.
Unfortunately, yes. I think it's awesome. And like you had mentioned a few minutes ago in the podcast, there's ways to attach hardware, or potential to attach other hardware in to increase our precision and our accuracy and all that. So, I mean, it's pretty crazy. We're just looking at being way more precise as scientists out here. So this is like an amazing announcement for the Apple keynote as us as archaeologists to, kind of, clearly it's got all of us scratching our heads and super excited.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael, any other thoughts on the watch and what this thing could potentially do?
I think that without what you just described, again, I'm just going to keep trying to kind of keep focus on us. The idea that I could have data portability on a device that's on my wrist is kind of amazing because um, we could have by having the maps available to us, which is great. And one of the things that I know we'll talk about later when we start doing the Codify podcasts
Mm-hmm.
is that we need to all be much more educated so we stop being such haters about the notion of, yeah, well, this device is only accurate to 30 meters.
Yeah.
So most of the things that we're doing, whether it's taking pictures or using a GPS, are predicated on this notion of stillness versus motion.
Mm-hmm.
But if you use any of us who've experienced, all of us have experienced GPS, and when you're moving, it's it's astoundingly accurate because you're moving.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you're getting this additional vector of triangulation. So instead of worrying about whether we're 30 meters off, if you're walking a transect, it's going to be spot on, actually. And that to me again is a major game changer that we're going to see by having wearables. That track. I mean, I do this every day. We were doing kind of, I would say, scientific trials of using different GPS devices as we just kind of walk along and see how it is in terms of the actual road we're walking on. And it's if you're walking, it's pretty much right down the center of the road, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So and that's because that movement provides that third level triangulation. We're the rover in that respect. Again, I mean, I don't want to be as excited as I feel, but I'm really like losing my mind by what this could mean for us. The iPad, when the iPad first came out, I was like, all right, when they put a camera in this, the iPad will be a game changer in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
It turned out the camera in the iPad wasn't so much a game changer. Now it is with the Pro.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we're going to talk about the iPhone 7 next. But I can say in terms of today, the iWatch, the Apple Watch coming out with GPS and waterproof for archaeology. This is a must-have device. I'm sorry, it is, especially with what we will all be working towards in terms of development over the next couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty exciting.
Yeah, if developers could just think about the watch as less of a notification device and more of an active piece of equipment, which would be fantastic. And I've got a couple apps that are that way. They're less about notifications and more about actually doing things on the watch. And if you do it right and you don't clutter up the display and you keep in mind that you've got a 1 inch by 1 inch display and that's it, and you don't try to overperform on it, then you can just do whatever you want and be pretty successful at it. It's pretty cool. So we're going to move on to the iPhone 7. However, I'm going to mention real quick, the original watch Series 1, the one I've got, has been dropped to $269. And true to Apple's form, I mean, say what you will about them as a company, but they're not just dropping the price, but that new dual-core chip they're putting in the Series 2, they're putting in the Series 1. So a lot of those new, faster things that it's going to be able to do, you'll also be able to do in the Series 1. And then the Series 2 starts at $100 more. Pre-order available on September 9th. It starts at $369. And this is for the Sport Edition. Keep in mind, the only thing you get by going away from the Sport Edition up in size, you don't get a better processor, you don't get more memory, you don't get anything, okay? What you do get is you go from the aluminum body, the aluminum shell to the steel one, or if you go up to $1,200, you get the ceramic one. And then the only other thing you get from way more expensive watches are fancy watch bands. And who gives a shit about fancy watch bands? Actually, you don't even need to get those from Apple anymore. There's plenty of third-party watch bands out there. We bought a great one for my wife on Amazon for like $30. So, and it's a decent one. It's not super crappy. So anyway, I would say if you really want to bust into this market, get the $269 Series 1. You won't have the GPS chip, and you won't be waterproof completely, which are about the only two things I can see you're not going to get out of this. But you'll have a pretty fantastic device that will be able to do all these wonderful things, like I said, except GPS. So, and also, you do need an iPhone for this stuff too. So if you've got an Android phone, it's simply not going to work. It'll work as a watch, and it'll do basic watch things. But I don't think you can even set it up without an iPhone because you have to turn on the Apple Watch app. and then point the iPhone's camera at the watch screen as it displays this weird electron cloud thing, and that syncs it up. So I don't think you could even sync it to an Android device. Also, you can't sync it to an iPad because the Apple Watch app is not available on the iPad. So that's also kind of weird. I hope they change that in the future because there's plenty of cell-connected iPads out there, and I don't see a problem in somebody who has an Android phone but they have an iPad and just connecting that to their Apple Watch. I honestly don't see the problem there. But anyway, so let's move on to the biggest announcement, which is the iPhone 7 and the iPhone 7 Plus. Apple's sticking with these different... They didn't even mention sizes. They just assume that everybody knows that the 7 is slightly smaller than the 7 Plus. But there were a couple features on iOS 10. I'm not going to get too much into that because I feel like the hardware is the big announcement here. But iOS 10, some of the big features that I noted that I like are lift to wake. So you lift up the phone and it brightens your screen up. Because right now they made the home button so sensitive for fingerprints that when you actually push that to light up your screen, even if you use the edge of your finger, and I just wanted to see the notifications that were on there, they all disappear and it goes to the home screen and it logs me into my phone. I'm like, son of a bitch, I wanted to see those notifications, because not all of those notifications appear in the pull down notification screen, which is also frustrating. So that's pretty handy to have that. Siri apps will now work for apps that aren't Apple, which again is something we can talk about, because if Siri, for those of you who don't know, didn't actually really work for third-party applications. It only works for Apple applications. Like I couldn't say, Siri, order me an Uber like you can to Amazon, but now you'll be able to. And if you think about this from an archaeology standpoint, you could simply pull out your phone, and while you're still walking, you can see you're coming up to a flag and say, Siri, start a new site recording. And then it'll open your site recording application, open you up a new site, and be done. It'll be ready for you.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, why not, right? So before we go on, just a couple more things here. You can do a lot more things within the Maps application now. They mentioned being able to order food and do different things within Maps just by clicking on a business, and then you'll have options. But I'm thinking with the Maps API being open to third-party developers, which is exactly what that means, that, again, archaeology applications will be able to use that to our advantage to do amazing things. And then the other thing is the machine learning intelligence in the keyboard. Everybody knows that autocorrect is a huge piece of shit, and this is just them saying they've tried to make it better. So we'll see how that works out. But anyway,
Damn
all this
you, autocorrect.
right. So all this is available on September 13th. Again, I don't know which ones of these features won't be available unless you get a 7 or 7 Plus. Some of that stuff might be available on the 6 and 6S and 6S Plus. I doubt most of that will be available below the 6, maybe in the 5 line, but I really doubt it, because it's usually hardware dependent, and they've upped the chip again this time with the new A10 chip, which we can get into later. But anyway, thoughts on the software upgrade, Michael? I know we've talked about this.
Yeah, so I started playing with Sierra, which is the latest OS 10 update, and then we have iOS 10.
Yeah.
It's ironic because next year is going to be the 10th anniversary of the iPhone, and they're going to be coming out with, I guess it'll be iPhone 8, but somehow it's the 10th anniversary, so it's all very confusing.
Right.
Anyway, couple things. So yeah, the ability for developers to use Siri and Maps is a big deal, and I know we're going to talk later, hopefully, about all the other affordances of the hardware, which include being able to actually do stuff with the camera for the first time ever as a third-party developer. So I'm going to just basically say out loud, I'm a third-party developer. Any of us who are in archaeology or CRM who are trying to do stuff with hardware are third-party developers to that hardware. Mm-hmm. And given I'm just noting your timing here. This is the part where I can get up on the soapbox and shout out loud. We have to remember that Swift, which is the programming language for developing Mac and iOS apps, is open source.
Yeah.
And the other major announcement that Apple made today is that their big press on education, mm-hmm. which basically means that they came out with a really amazing way to learn how to program. That's kind of like Mario Brothers. It's really cool. It's a game, and it runs on iPad, and it's totally free.
Yeah.
So to me, I see for the first time since I've been dealing with programming, which is like forever, I see the confluence of remarkable hardware, open source software, um, a really wonderful developer experience.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't believe me, just go ahead and go to developer.apple.com and sign up and try that experience. And if you have any issues and you write to the Apple people, you'll probably get a response within like half an hour,
Nice.
24 hours a day. I mean, it is a wonderful time for us to be thinking in totally new ways on how we can use this incredible hardware for our field. So yeah,
All right.
I'm a little bit excited.
We are going to talk about that hardware, the iPhone 7 and 7 Plus, when we get back for the next break. Back in a second.
Archaeology and Ale is a free monthly talk presented by Archaeology in the City from the University of Sheffield Archaeology Department. That's where the archaeology part of Archaeology and Ale comes from. As for the ale part, the talk is held upstairs at the Red Deer, a great local pub on Pitt Street in Sheffield, South Yorkshire, on the last Thursday of every month. If you're in Sheffield, do come along, and don't worry, non-ale alternatives are also available. If you can't make it to Sheffield, never fear. You can listen to the Archaeology and Ale talk every month, right here on the Archaeology Podcast Network. And now, back to the show.
Okay, we're back, and we're going to finish up this discussion on the Apple keynote with pretty much the biggest items they talked about. We're going to get into the iPhone 7 right now. I'll mention a few details, and then we'll talk about those, and we'll mention a few more, and then we'll talk about those. We're going to kind of end up glossing over everything because they mentioned 10 primary features of the iPhone from a hardware standpoint, and we're not going to actually get into all of those, but we'll get into some of them. Anyway, first off, it's got a new taptic engine, they call it, similar to the Apple Watch, although the Apple Watch one they call a haptic engine, which taps on your wrist. But this is a similar thing, but now for the iPhone. I guess for people that keep it close to their body all the time, that'll be a pretty decent feature. I'm interested to see what we can actually do with that. But anyway, the new enclosure. Now, this is the big one for archaeology. The new body that they've got around this thing, because one of the big things, they removed the headphone jack, which we'll get into. So now the only open ports on this thing are really the area around the home button, the lightning connector at the bottom, and the speakers, which are now at the top and bottom of the iPhone, are the only open areas. But they've managed to seal all this up, and it's now water and dust resistant. And that doesn't really mean anything when you say that. You really need to know what the standards are. And they said this is an IP67 protection standard. And we've talked about those before, but I've got the page pulled up here, and I'll let you know what that means right now. So the 6 in 67 is the highest amount of dust protection that they have, and that's all the 6 refers to as dust protection. It's dust tight, which means no ingress of dust, complete protection against contact. Vacuum must be applied to actually get dust into it. So unless you're working in space, it's not a big problem. And test duration of up to 8 hours based on airflow. So that's pretty amazing. That's the highest level of protection you can have, is that 6 on the first letter, the first number. The second one is a 7, and the only ones better than that are 8 and 9K. But the 7 is immersion up to 1 meter depth of water. Ingress of water is in harmful quantities shall not be possible when the enclosure is immersed in water under defined conditions of pressure and time up to 1 meter of submersion. So basically that means you can drop it in a creek and pick it back up and it'll be fine. Okay, you wouldn't want to go swimming with it. You wouldn't want to submerge it in water forever, but you can drop it in the water and it will be okay. You can drop it in the toilet. Let's just be honest here. You can drop it in the toilet and it will be fine. Clean it, but it'll be fine. So that's pretty amazing. That's pretty huge for archaeology, and it's kind of the first device I've considered putting a less than, military grade case on just because of that. Because really the reasons I put like life-proof cases on mine are because of the water and dust protection, not because of the durability of the hardware, although you will crack a screen, if it lands just right, but we'll see. So yeah, we'll get to play with that a little bit. All right, so we don't need to talk about that too much. Let's get into the big one here, the camera. So there's two big differences between the iPhone 7 and the iPhone 7 Plus. And I'll mention that first, and then we'll get into the camera. First off, the iPhone 7 Plus is a bigger case. So it actually has two cameras on the back. It's got the camera I'm about to talk about and an additional telephoto lens right next to that. Okay, so first let's get into the primary camera because that's the same on both devices. It has optical image stabilization, an f1.8 aperture lens. It's also got a 6-element lens, and maybe Michael can probably eliminate some of this technology stuff for us on the cameras because I don't really know it. But what they said the 6-element lens does is it allows you to have sharp edge-to-edge photographs, whereas if you've got fewer elements on your lens, you'll have like a sharp center area or something like that, and maybe blurring out to the edges. It's got a 12-megapixel sensor, which is huge. True Tone Flash, which is 4 LEDs that provide 50% more light than previous models. It's got a flicker sensor that compensates for artificial lighting because those are actually, if you're able to see it, if you're a robot, you can see that artificial lighting actually runs on a cycle related to your electricity. It's got an image signal processor that does all kinds of fun things. We can get into that a little later too. One of the other big things is they've opened up the APIs for capturing live photos, which on itself, I don't really care about. But it does open up, since there's an API for the live photos, that does open you up to doing some other things with some third-party applications, which I'm pretty excited about. And then the other big thing is the raw camera API. So they've opened that up as well. So real quick before we get into the details of this, so let's add on the 7 Plus the telephoto lens. So basically what that allows them to do is more efficient zooming. You can hardware zoom up to 2x now with that telephoto, which is pretty big because up to this point, the iPhone's just been a pure software zoom. So now you can hardware zoom up to 2x and maintain all that same level of quality on your photograph. And you can also software zoom up to 10x, and that's even better now because of the enhanced optics. So let's start with Michael. Michael, what do you think about all these fancy camera things? Is it worth it? Are you going to throw your SLR in the trash?
No. No. But I mean, okay. So I have two minds here. One of the key things is the reality check. The reality check is that what we have realized over the last couple of years, looking at what we're all doing in the discipline, is that we have to just face the fact that we take really terrible photos. Our photos suck. They're horrible. I mean, they're horrible because of all the pressures that we already know, and that's worthy of a whole different podcast. But this device, anyone who's been using a modern smartphone, your pictures are already pretty good.
Yeah.
So there's that. But this thing, everything you just described, like I'm thinking about like being a photographer for literally 30 years and I think about my dad and Ansel Adams and the zone system and film and fluorescent versus halogen and outdoor light and north shade for Munsell and all those things that I have to know as a photographer. Mm-hmm. With this phone, you don't need to know that. So your photos are going to be pretty great. Yep. And I've already gotten to experience this because taking photos on the iPad Pro, again, I don't have the big one. Mm-hmm. That would be really crazy looking. But the 9.7, I mean, the photos that iPad Pro takes are beyond beautiful. So to take good pictures, this is probably the best device you could have in your pocket if you only had one. It's still, and then on that, and on top of that, the developer angle, which I'm still trying to get us to talk about a little bit. So now we have the ability to have camera raw. Mm-hmm. So let's just take one requirement. If you work in Nevada and you're working on BLM land, they want you to shoot TIFF files. Okay?
Right. You
cannot shoot a TIFF file. You can't produce a TIFF file with a camera phone. And basically, I mean, if we were, we're honest and we had 3,000 people, 2,990 of those people are shooting JPEGs.
Yeah.
Right. So now you can actually shoot a camera raw file and not have to worry about like, oh my God, I'm doing the right thing. And I can convert that file into a finished TIFF file that's perfectly compliant at 12 megapixels with a BLM. I think we're done here. That's huge. That's
Well,
freaking
Yeah, for real.
huge.
yeah,
Right?
let's ignore for a second the fact that those Nevada archaeologists out there that have read the standards and guidelines. Let's ignore for a second that the BLM actually says in those guidelines that you can, if all you can shoot in is JPEG, you can post process and convert those into TIFF files, which is actually technically impossible. So
True.
let's
It
ignore
also
that,
makes my heart hurt.
right?
Yeah, all my heart hurting right now. So this is going to make my heart hurt a lot less, and it's going to produce better things. Now, but if you tie the iOS 10, the iPhone 7 with an external camera for those times when you need to have that, then you're really you have everything you need. I mean, so I just want to touch on, I know we'll have to do a whole segment on photography or 30 of them, but optical zoom at 2x. So for all of us who've been doing like digital photography for like decades, digital zoom equals like, that's just not a good thing ever. Because what all it's doing is just taking the field of view and cutting that down. It's truncating that field of view. If you have 5,000 pixels across, it's showing you 2,000 or 1,000 pixels across, for the purpose of giving you a quote unquote zoom of that. This camera is doing something actually different. It's actually processing that data in a multi-pixel kind of way. It's doing some pretty interesting things. Now, the problem is that it still doesn't allow us full manual capabilities, and there's two things that you need. So this is the commercial break, if you will, for photogrammetry. For photogrammetry, if you want to produce 3D imaging, we need two things. We need to lock either aperture or shutter, and we need the camera to not be a rolling shutter. And there's no reason to talk about that now, other than to say that this camera still has both of those issues. It's still a rolling shutter, and you can't control aperture and shutter as far as I know. So with those two things, we still don't have the perfect device for doing 3D imaging, but you know what? For everything else, it's going to be amazing. Absolutely amazing.
And I wasn't going to mention this, but since you're kind of bringing up the quality of the camera here, let me bring up one other thing. Their image signal processor, they call it, which, by the way, performs 100 billion operations in 25 milliseconds every time you take a picture. So if we can't do something with that, I don't know who can. But anyway, one of the things a few of the list of things that this does is when you take a picture, it does face and body detection, which we'll get into in a minute. It sets the exposure, sets the focus, does white balancing and sets the color, does tone mapping, noise reduction, and can actually fuse multiple photos into one for what Apple calls the perfect image. So as long as they open the API for all that stuff for us to use that signal image processor, then a lot of the stuff that we want to do for a photogrammetry standpoint, we might be able to force it to do, right? Apple's not really thinking photogrammetry. They're just thinking, soccer moms taking photos. But, if they open all that up, then we might be able to get it to do some of those fantastic things. And one of those things that thing can do with that face and body detection is something Chris was mentioning before the show started, which is the shallow depth of field. It's not a feature that's available right away. They said it'll be as a free update later this year because they're still working on it. But basically, you take the photo, and everybody's seen this before. What that means is you take a photo of somebody like a portrait, which is a new setting. You can choose portrait. You take that photo, it automatically detects that there's a person there or a body or whatever, and blurs the background intelligently and brings the person into sharp focus. And that's pretty cool that it does that automatically in that setting. So we'll have to see how it works when it really comes out, but that's it. So anyway, I'm pretty excited about, some of the features that are possible.
Yeah.
But some of the other features on the new iPhone, the new HD Retina display that the 7 has is 25% brighter, which I appreciate because, especially being in my LifeProof case here, sometimes the display is practically invisible in bright sunlight, which is irritating. They're of course continuing the 3D touch, but they're opening that up to more third-party applications and the functionality for it. So I'm pretty excited. Michael and I have talked about some pretty awesome 3D touch possibilities with archaeology applications, and I'm liking where that's going. Well, we've got a few minutes here. I'll just mention real quick the speakers. Maybe this will help you for, music during excavation, but it's got stereo speakers now for the first time. If you hold the iPhone in landscape mode, there's one on the left and one on the right, which is pretty cool. It has twice the volume of previous models, it says, but volume isn't everything. It's better to have twice the quality as well, because it kind of sucks right now. But
the LTE is amazing. 450 megabits per second.
Yeah, that's pretty fast.
Right?
Yeah.
That's astounding. I mean, that's like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And let's talk about something that I know Michael's going to have a comment on, the lightning jack. So one of the things they did to make this waterproof and to allow other things inside the phone, because they said, the old style headphone jack really does take up a lot of real estate in an increasingly real estate tight area as far as components goes. You want a bigger battery, well, you got to take out that goddamn headphone jack because it takes up a lot of space. It's got an old-fashioned solder connection on it because it's huge, and it just takes up a lot of area. So, and it's a way for water to get into your phone as well. So anyway, they took it out. So now you can plug headphones in through the lightning jack that have a lightning jack connection, and there's a number of them out there that already are ready for that. But of course, Apple wants you to use their new Bluetooth headphones, their AirPods. But let's just talk about audio for a second real quick, Michael, because while it's not really archaeology related, I know you're excited about it because digital audio.
Well, actually, it actually is. I mean, this is the thing. Like, I mean, I know that when we talk about compliance archaeology, this somehow doesn't ever make the list, but as humans, we have 5 senses, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we focus on, physical documentation in textual format. We focus on location data, written word, and images. Mm-hmm. But we're forgetting everything else. And I know we know Apple hasn't taken a swipe at smell-o-vision or taste-o-vision yet. That hasn't been done. But I mean, my dissertation was on the archaeology of vision. And I have a good friend, Steve Mills, who's done a lot of work on archaeoacoustics. And if we're looking at like enclosures and caves and environments and on his historic side, houses and buildings, or we start dealing with the UNESCO requirements for for like just thinking about the physical environment, or thinking that what a song might have sounded like, and all that. All of this really matters. Okay, so that's a nice background, but this is the reality of what has just happened, which is what I was saying prior to this show. As an audiophile, as someone who grew up with vinyl, mic drop, just let that sit in. And then went to mixtapes, and then went to analog digital adapters. Now what's happened is that basically all of the adapters that we have are digital analog adapters, right? So we make a recording digitally, and then we have to, but then we plug in through our 3.5 millimeter adapter really crappy headphones. They're terrible. I mean, they're all bad. And Bluetooth is just as bad. I mean, I am an audiophile. I love music. I love the sound. I love sound. So it's the same problem. What Apple has just done is they said, look, we're making a bold move here. We're saying that we're going to come out with a new technology and new chip dedicated to audio for the first time on a mobile device. That is actually true. Their new chip is the first chip dedicated specifically to audio processing, digital to digital. So these little AirPods that you can buy from Apple, and they've opened up to third parties, other than Beats, by the way, owned by Apple,
right.
Are leveraging that chip. So we're talking about a wireless technology that's in your ears, that's getting a digital signal from your digital device. That, what I just said, those words, digital to digital, that's a whole new world, people. Very exciting. So this is huge. But for everyone who's listening, all the haters, as I said, I was waiting. Chris and I were live. The phone ships with the adapter for your good old-fashioned headphones, which I still use, and it's just right there. So if you need to adapt to your old headphones because you love them, or your massive, cans that you spent like $1,200 on,
Yeah.
you can still do that. But you do have the advantage also of going fully digital for the first time in history.
Plus, it comes with their other new earbuds, which I mean, say what you will about them. If they fit in your ears, and that's really the big thing, then that's fine. But they also come with their Lightning connector earbuds. So the AirPods are different; they're a separate purchase. They'll be available in late October for $159. But like you said, they'll come with the adapter and a set of Lightning jack earbuds. So maybe those will sound better. They always sucked in the past, and they fall out of your ears, which I don't think is going to change. But they may sound better now because of the Lightning connector. So, Chris, what are your thoughts on wrapping up the iPhone discussion?
Well, I've got a few thoughts considering the iPhone and the watch, the new generation of the watch and the new software. My thoughts are that we can't promise this, but it might be a huge leap forward in technology on the simple principle of technotasking. So I mean that because like most updated versions of technology across the board haven't really been upgrades. They've just been updates in that all they do is give us more stuff to do. And so now we have an even more realistic potential for actual like task efficiency, which is a really cool thing for like archaeologists to consider. It's like we're looking at our culture in real time and being like, oh, wow, we're actually being like more efficient now.
Yeah.
And so like this is the case with GIS and other platforms that we use in archaeology for like analytical tools, is that we're not really constricted by the software or the hardware. We're mostly limited by the data. So there's just this dearth of data. We need to get out there and get it. And so now with all of these upgrades that they're rolling out with this Apple announcement, we're looking at these this whole like suite of Apple devices as another component in that sphere of capabilities. And so like we've got a hardware and software package that's going to accurately and precisely record archaeological data, which is super important for the work that we do. And, it's super important for us to be able to present that back to the public and justify, the cost and the labor and all that we're doing. So this is awesome for us, and it's awesome for the public too. Besides the fact that we had mentioned earlier on the capabilities for like improving public health and safety. So that is another point too, is that the enormous potential for advancements in public health and public safety could have some really far-reaching impacts on society. And that's another super cool thing for anthropologists to consider. So I don't know. I think this whole thing is awesome for us as like archaeologists and anthropologists.
Yeah, I totally agree, man. Those are great points, and it really is a game changer every year when new stuff comes out, and not just with Apple. With whatever smartphone you've got. I mean, they're all getting smarter and smarter and smarter. So I'll just leave you guys with this. We're going to do a fourth segment because we do want to talk about Mac OS Sierra and the new operating system for Mac computers, and some of the developer options. But I'll leave you with this real quick. I read a book recently called The Innovators, and they talked about, the development of computers from, the Babbage machine and Lovelace all the way up to now with Apple. But anyway, in the 60s, I want to say, maybe even the 50s, the transistor was invented. And the transistor is basically just a fancy electrical term for, routing electricity from one place to the next. It has basically a gate in it kind of thing, and it tells electricity to do one thing or the other. Well, transistors became the heart of computer processors, okay? That first transistor, though, you could hold in your hand, right? It was like the size of the palm of your hand. It was huge. The new A10 chip on the iPhone, just let this sink in for a second, has 3.3 billion transistors on it. And that's inside your phone. And 40 years ago, you could hold it in the palm of your hand. So technology's come a long ways, and it's only going to get better. We'll be back in just a second. Professional Certifications for Scientists, or PCS, aims to provide practical educational videos, field guides, knowledge tests, professional certifications, and deployment connections to professional scientists everywhere. Check out the videos page for high-quality training videos on a variety of topics. Find PCS videos at www.pcscourses.com/videos. PCS, a place for good scientists to become great science professionals. All right, we're back for our fourth segment on this marathon Archaeotech podcast, and let's just wrap up the iPhone 7 conversation real quick because I want to mention pricing and availability. You can pre-order Thursday night at midnight Pacific time, so Friday, September 9th, and the iPhone 7 starts at $649 if you're paying for it outright, and that's for the 32 gigabyte edition. For the first time ever, Apple doesn't have a 16 gigabyte because 2016, let's get real here. And then they've got a 128 and a 256 gigabyte model. Still no micro SD card, so if you're concerned with space, I'd get the bigger one. The iPhone 7 Plus, same sizes, but starts at $769. Now, one thing people might not be aware of, if you want to get a new phone every year, you might look into this. I know AT&T has a similar program, but it might actually be more expensive. I'm on this program. But if you use the iPhone upgrade program, it starts at $32 a month, which is probably for the base model. But you get an unlocked phone with Apple Care, and you can get a new one every year. It started last year, so the people that just did that are getting their new phones this year without paying any. They're just continuing to pay their monthly cost, and they get a new phone, and they get Apple Care for the whole time. And it's an unlocked phone, which is a pretty big deal. So, all right, well, we're going to talk about one of the final announcements that was made this summer. They didn't really talk about it much this time around because it's just going to be out, I think, later here in September, if I'm not mistaken. But Michael, you've got a developer's license, and you got in on the beta for Mac OS Sierra, which is the new operating system for Mac computers, desktop and laptop computers. So what are some of the big highlights for Sierra from an operating system standpoint and from a developer standpoint that you've noticed after working with it for a little while?
Yeah, right. And also, of course, to mention that iOS 10 is coming out at the same time. So I'll flip it back to say, for one thing, the big thing is, yes, we're talking about different ecosystems here, but if you want things to work on a phone, and use Swift, you can develop for iOS 10, which will work on iPhone and iPad, and Mac OS 10 all at the same time, which is pretty amazing. So some of the things we've seen, of course, on the Sierra side. I have it working on my computer. It's worked actually fine. I haven't had any real issues. We have Siri built in, which is pretty sweet. So you can finally, kind of be like Cortana if you're using a Windows 10 machine. Although today, I guess this is pretty funny. I was recording a video, and then Cortana decided to show a bunch of videos, which were really inappropriate and had nothing to do with my taste because I've never used Cortana before. That was pretty fun. So that's cool. To me, the big things which will feel subtle but are super cool, I gotta say, are around storage. So for the first time in the operating system, you have the ability to have files that are basically virtual that appear as physical files using iCloud. So if you're in Dropbox, you can go into Dropbox, and I can have a whole folder and selectively sync. So I can have that folder not appear on my computer, so that, because I have a 6 terabyte storage on Dropbox because I have a business. And if I tried to sync my entire Dropbox, my computer would explode, right?
Right.
But imagine you can do that on a file by file basis, right? And they still appear like files. So I can double click on them, I can use them, they can be in multiple locations on my computer, but they're not on my computer. In other words, my 256 gigs of flash memory on my laptop isn't being completely filled up from all of that space. So this whole vector around storage is actually really amazing. And it also goes for photos and videos. So if I have photos I've downloaded, I get an optimized file on my computer, but the full resolution camera raw file that we're just talking about is going to be stored in the cloud. Now, of course, you're going to pay for that. So you're making a choice. You could pay $10 to Apple for a terabyte of data a month, or you can pay Google $10 for a terabyte of data a month, or you can pay Dropbox. It pretty much comes out to $10 a month. So it is a choice, but I started playing with it, and I'm kind of blown away by it. So that's big. To go back to development, basically, I'm just going to kind of make the public service announcement for all of us who are not really developers loading this stuff, because I consider myself in that camp too. I mean, I'm not a programmer. I dabble in all this stuff, and I understand technology pretty well, but I'm not, a hardcore programmer. I don't live in a C++ or Objective-C world or Java, right?
Right.
I mean, I barely speak English, much less all these other languages. So the idea, I mean, you can now really do amazing things and build phenomenal apps. And they're opening these up to kids, as I mentioned, through the iPad game app and other things. I think that this is going to change everything. And the fact that they're doing this as open source software that's free is huge. So to me, that is a major game changer. Last point though, and this is a big one. So over the last several years, we've been taking a look at, again, I'm going to keep like bracketing this for archaeology or environmental science, if you will, or environmental consulting. So what should we care about? I have a device that's, it's my physical folder that's, my binder in my backpack, or it's my phone, or it's my iPad, or it's my tablet device, and I lose it. And the security of that data, we care about that. We care about the security. We care about the quality of the data that we're producing. And I'll just give it an easy example. I have photos on an Apple device. It would be in your camera roll. In any other device, it would be shared in a million of different ways you can share it, or just sitting in your camera photos app on your Android device. And when you lose your phone, all that stuff is vulnerable to you. I feel like for the first time, we really have a good chance of securing that data locally on a device and being very aware, specifically in a transparent way, of how that data is being transferred from device to device and action to action. And again, I'm talking from a developer's perspective. So I can say, all right, I have this file that is the photo. I'm asking my device, your device, sorry, to give me permission to see that photo. I'm now going to transfer that photo into my application and do stuff to it. I'm going to be able to tell you how I've shared it. Now, we don't have to do all those things. We can just go ahead and use Instagram and not know how any of that was done. But we have the ability to manage that process. So we can be as open or as secure as we want without compromise. And that's huge. And that's new.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that to me feels like kind of a big deal for our discipline, frankly.
Yeah, you're right, because as we move more and more into a digital world for archaeology, and really for any data collection profession, where you're collecting the data and that's the only place that it exists, as we start moving more and more into that world for everybody, knowing what's going on with your data and where it's being stored and how it's being stored, and then how it's leaving your device and where it's going from that point is an increasingly difficult and important problem. So, it's something we all have to be aware of. You can't just go out and collect a whole bunch of data on your devices and not be concerned with where that's being backed up, for lack of a better word. If it's backed up in the cloud, or you're backing it up on site because you have no connectivity or something. Or I'd even like to see all the devices just like automatically, when they get within range of another device, like from an enterprise standpoint, you can link them all up and say they just share all their data with each other. Even not talking about syncing your data. Even if they just took a copy of whatever the database is and put it on another device when it got nearby. I'd even be happy with that. That's a little messy, but I'd be happy with that. Because that's duplication data. And that's one thing, quite frankly, paper can't do unless you've got a copy machine in your backpack and a battery. So, which I don't think anybody does just yet. So, but yeah, those are good points. Is there anything else specifically on the Sierra operating system that you think is worth mentioning?
I've only had it for like a week. So not really. I mean, these were kind of the major things. So, being able to, if we add in what we just saw, which is collaborative real-time editing with iWork, the ability to have kind of a seamless work or user experience is kind of amazing. But one thing that would be good, though, Chris Sims, I know you mentioned that you have some developer friends who were paying attention today, and it would be great. I think to round out this segment or perhaps the show, it would be great to hear, from people who aren't us on like, all right, well, so coming into this, I have had to listen. I was in Italy for like the last 4 months, and I've listened to 4 months of hate. I've been listening to 4 months of like, oh my God, they're taking away my iPhone jack. I mean, my headphone jack, which now we know they didn't do. Okay, so that's over. So tell me, what did your developer friends have to say about all this stuff?
Yeah, well, I had kind of touched on that at the beginning of our podcast. So one of the main points from one of my friends, Chris Owens, he had really picked up on how important RAW is and how it was going to change the game for point and shoot cameras and also for using the iPhone as a professional tool. Some of the other points that Chris Owens had relayed to me is that the depth mapping, so with the shallow field of vision or field of view, the depth mapping is interesting because he wonders if that kind of technology will be transferred in non-photo applications. One of the parallels could be like looking at the Xbox Kinect system. And so he wonders if that hardware and software capability kind of that's built into the iPhone 7 or 7S could have augmented reality applications, since it's effectively got a 3D mapping system inside it. So that could be something really neat to come out of that. And then also with RAW, I think it's neat to look at what we might see in the form of like how we look at petroglyphs and cave paintings and stuff like that. So I think that it's going to have a lot more technology at our hands to look at that kind of thing. So let me pull up Steve Fowler's comments here. Steve's been a guest on the Archaeotech podcast a few other times. So he had a really funny tweet earlier today. He said that line about headphone jack removal being an act of courage had to be pulled right out of a Gavin Belson speech in Silicon Valley, right? So that show is awesome.
That's amazing.
But his other comments really kind of went along that vein on how there's a lot of like kind of skeptical criticism of Apple's just their cords and some of their hardware just not being very durable. And so Steve is concerned that the Lightning to headphone jack adapter is not going to be durable. Also, I've been looking around at the hashtag Apple event, and a lot of people are disappointed that the power source still hasn't been upgraded. And so a lot of people are concerned that like the cables are just going to continue to fray like they do. I don't know what people are really doing to cables though, because like I've had some that last years, and maybe I'm just not punishing them enough. I don't know.
Hey, I just bought a titanium one last year, and it's amazing. So
yeah, but I mean, I guess that is the point, is that they wish that the components were more durable straight out of the box. So it makes sense. And then other issues like you had mentioned this, Michael, the first mountain bike jump you make with those AirPods, one's gonna fly straight out of your head, and good luck finding that. So I don't know how functional that's going to be in the real world, but I think it's an awesome technology.
Now, I think you can attach one of those little tile things to the AirPod so they'll look like earrings. And then when it flies out of your head, you can find it with the Bluetooth on your phone or your watch. Right, Michael?
There we go.
Oh, yeah. I'm just going to basically epoxy them. I'm going to weld them, in fact, to my body. It's going to be great.
That's awesome. You know, as far as the wires thing goes, because I'm looking on Twitter too, and I'm seeing some stuff about how Apple's disrupted the cable connections and all that stuff again. Although they've only changed the connector or any sort of connector on their devices, I think twice. If you count removing the headphone jack as one, then 3 times. But anyway, so they've had a pretty good track record of sticking with the same thing for a while until it didn't make sense anymore. But anyway, I want to live in a wire-free world with everything, man. I don't want headphone wires. I don't want charging cables. You know how much of a pain in the ass it is to have a charging cable? I really wish we just had inductive charging literally all over our universe. I mean, I know there's coffee shops out near Michael. There's at least Starbucks out there that I've seen. I can't remember where the one it was I seen. It's wherever LSA and Associates is, Michael, what that town. Their Starbucks right there has inductive charging in their tables for phones that have that. And there's iPhone cases you can get that have that will charge your phone. And like the Mophie case, I think, has inductive charging. Maybe. I can't remember. Anyway, some Samsung phones have inductive charging. You just lay it on the table and it charges. You don't even think about it. You just lay it on the table. And I love that. So I'm all for whatever Apple wants to do from a cable standpoint. It's not that expensive to probably upgrade my headphones, which I probably need to do anyway, or upgrade some other stuff, which I probably need to do anyway. It's just people are going to bitch about something whether they like it or not. So
I mean, well, Phil Schiller said it actually right, despite all the other hyperbole. And that is that the actual Lightning jack itself is an amazing digital jack. That's its purpose. And so if you think about it, like when that one jack, I can connect my phone and or my iPad, and I can project video, and I have all of the audio signal processing, all the data signal processing. It's an amazing jack. So all they're saying is, hey, why don't we just use it? And if you still need analog, we will provide that as well. I am, just so we are very clear, my wife has the new MacBook, which has just the one jack,
the USB-C.
USB-C.
Yeah.
It's so hateable. If she doesn't remember, I think actually I just see it right now. So the actual adapter is sitting over here. So if she actually needed to connect it to anything, she'd be screwed. Yeah. So that sucks. But this is built into your phone. You can't not bring it with you. Yeah. Right? It charges, does all that stuff. It's great. It's fine. It's really okay.
It's funny you mentioned that about the USB-C adapter. I just had a crown put on 3 hours or 2 hours before this podcast, and my dentist was asking me, hey, what's going on? And I mentioned watching the Apple keynote today and talking about it this afternoon. And he's like, oh, and he went into this whole thing on how, he uses a new MacBook Air. I think he actually meant the new MacBook Pro. And then he bought his mom one too and upgraded her computer. He said 20 years into the future from the last one she had. But he said, he uses only having that USB-C jack is actually a huge problem for him for multiple reasons. One is he uses software in his dental practice that requires a USB security dongle, like an actual physical security dongle. And he can't plug that into the USB-C. He's got to plug it into an adapter. And he said it just pisses him off because now he's got to carry around some block that has all these other plugs in it that plugs into his computer. And that's just a secondary device to hang around. And I think it just sucks that we're in a world we have to live through this transition out of cables, which is really what this is. It's a 10, 15-year transition away from cables. And once we transition to everything being wireless or something like that, then we won't have anything to complain about anymore. But we all have to live through this transition. So, it is what it is. But
well, what we should put in the show notes, the moment in the keynote where Phil Schiller shows the switchboard operator.
Right.
Because seriously, I've been here so many times. So when they said, we're going to get rid of the CD ROM player or the 3.5-inch floppy drive or whatever.
Right.
Ladies and gentlemen, get over it.
Get over
Seriously.
it. Yeah.
Seriously. I mean, just have a tribe send me CDs today.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that's a reality that we need to deal with, but and not everything. Again, I mean, I've tried my best today to be not just the Apple fanboy, but to say the things that came up today in the keynote. Not all of them. I mean, I could care less about Pokemon Go on my watch ever. But many of the things that they talked about are actual game changers for the next many years of what we're trying to do that this podcast is about, which is around, doing field work and doing it in a secure and smart way and being able to share and all the good stuff. Right. So that's great, right?
Exactly.
And hopefully they'll motivate other, developers to do it. Or you can go get yourself a brand new Samsung phone and hope it doesn't explode in your ass. Just saying, it's your option. It's a choice. I mean, the consumer choice. I'm trying not to laugh, but I'm laughing so much.
Dude, and with hipster jeans on, that the struggle is real. Actually, you're probably just.
Totally so real.
So. All right,
because our artisanal jeans made out of straw are going to explode along with your phone.
Oh my God, my thigh friction alone would destroy those. All right, so I'm not going to leave you with thigh friction, but we're already running long on this, so let's just run a little bit longer. I want you guys to both tell me, and then I'll finish it out. Just in a couple words, what do you think is the biggest thing that came out today that is a game changer for archaeology and environmental sciences? The biggest thing that you think we can use right now that will help us? Chris, go ahead.
Oh man, way to put me on the spot right off the bat.
And it could be a feature or the device itself. I mean, think of one thing you think that is the biggest thing.
I think for us physically in the field doing our jobs, I think two things. So one, putting a GPS in the Apple Watch it's not just a cool thing to do, it's a really practical thing to do, especially like you had touched on earlier. Like, we can connect much more powerful devices to the Apple Watch now. Mm-hmm. And we can tether it and do spatial science with it. Yeah. So I think that's not just cool for archaeology. I think like anything that can use spatial applications is going to benefit from that. The other I think is the ability to sync and work in real time is going to change the sciences as a whole, in terms of like I mean, we've seen for the past at least decade more and more collaborative research has come out, across different disciplines. And I think this is going to really propel that in a way that's just really exciting.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, that was not only two things, but more than a couple words. So let's go to Michael now and see how he does. AirPods, yes. Michael, aside from Instagram being way more powerful now, what do you think is the biggest game changer?
Yeah. So what the other Chris said, I will second, and what you just said, I will so not second. So if I was on the island, I had to vote for one thing, I would absolutely say it's the camera and the underlying software things we can now do with the camera.
Yeah.
So the second part being important, because now with the ability to basically from here forward, this is all we need to know. So yes, today you have to buy a new phone. So in 3 years, your 3-year-old phone will shoot camera raw. Mm-hmm. Let's just let that settle in, right? So from here on, from September, 2016 forward, camera raw is finally a thing. It's going to come into the mainstream. That's huge for photography.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest thing that happened today. So thank you, Apple, for making that happen.
Nice. All right. Well, I'll round it out, and I'm just going to go hardware on this one, because I think you can have a device that does all these fantastic things, but if you drop it in a stream and it's all wiped out immediately, what was it for? You know what I mean? And we're hard on equipment. We're hard on gear in environmental sciences and specifically archaeology. I don't know how many times I leaned over in the field and my iPad mini fell out and landed on a basalt boulder, right, Chris? I mean, I don't know how many times I dropped that damn thing. Yeah. So, and they not once broke. Not one of them broke. So I'm going to go with the new hardware case on the iPhone 7 because I think the iPhone 7 is going to be a powerful, 7 Plus, a powerful recording device. We might be switching from iPads, quite frankly. And if that's the case, these things are now waterproof. They're completely dustproof. And it's only going to get better from here. And with the brighter display and all that stuff, I think the hardware itself is a real game changer. And I think we're going to see more and more of those as primary field devices, almost rather than iPads, quite frankly. So if you can do all that stuff in a smaller device, people are going to want to carry a smaller device just because of weight and efficiency. So
yeah,
but we'll see. Every device has its purpose. I still think the iPad Pro, the large one, even the 9.7-inch one, are fantastic for like feature and profile drawing and things like that. A lot of your big drawing tasks that are more stationary from an excavation standpoint, fantastic for that stuff. But I think the iPhone 7 Plus is going to start taking over a lot of the phase 1 field tasks that we do in the field. So. All right, guys, let's kill it because we're at something like an hour and a half on this podcast, but I think it was worth it. So thanks, Michael, and thanks, Chris, for joining me today. And we'll see you guys in the field. I know that's my sign off for CRMR podcast, but it so fits right now. So we'll see you in the field. Thanks. That's it for another episode of the Archaeotech podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/archaeotech. If you like the show and want to comment, please do. You can leave comments about this or any other episode on the website or on the iTunes page for this episode. You can also email us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com or use the contact form on the podcast webpage. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website or tweet your questions with the hashtag Archaeotech or tag @ArchPodNet in your tweet. Please share the link to this show wherever you saw it. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, you can do so on iTunes or on Stitcher Radio. You can also type the name of the podcast into your favorite podcasting app and subscribe that way. Don't forget to go over to iTunes and leave a review of the show. It helps us get noticed so more people can find our podcast and benefit from the content. Also, send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. This show is produced by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 US a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to archpodnet.com/members for more info.